Welcome to a special episode of The Awakening. We have a special guest this evening, Douglas Woodward. Very excited to have him with us. He will be here momentarily. I'm very excited to actually host him here in my studio, also known as my home. And in the meantime, we're going to just kind of get started. My wonderful co-host, John Hall, is with me. How are you doing this evening, John?
I am clean, dry, and intact, Doug. It's good to be back. It's good to see you. We just came out of the Appalachian Mountains, and it's good to be home.
Awesome. Now, what were you doing? Why did you go to the Appalachian Mountains?
We in this family, in my little family, we go up there for Pentecost almost every year, Shavuot, and we go up into the mountains just like Yahweh bringing the Torah down off Mount Sinai. We go up to the mountain. You had the mountain of Sinai, the mountain of Zion, both mountains of God, where He brings the law down into our hearts, and we go up there and we celebrate Pentecost.
Wow.
Every year. So it's nice. We did some wood knocking, tried to look for some Bigfoot, didn't get anything back. If we did, I would have been beating it back home really quick. But there's a lot of black bear and a lot of wildlife up there. It's just so beautiful. It's beautiful to go up there.
What you're telling me then is God has actually given us pre-established vacation times. Is that what you're saying?
He has given us, yes, 7 of them, including Sabbath.
It sounds so legalistic, John. I mean, do you have to take a day off? I mean, seriously.
Oh, it's so hard to go up there and just spend a few days relaxing. It's really difficult.
Oh, I know. You know, my son and I calculated one time that if you take all the different holidays and the actual amount of days you get off, including the Sabbath, you get about 84 days. You know, it varies every year, but you get about 84 days of vacation a year. And, you know, the funny thing is we have people that are just throwing their hands up and saying this is so legalistic that you have to take these days off. But, you know, have you ever belonged to a company where they say, look, as part of being part of this company, you get, 20 paid holidays a year. And you're like, well, I will not take those days off. I mean, who's ever heard of such a thing, right? I mean, imagine, you know, it's whatever holiday you want to pick, okay, Memorial Day, you know, and the boss says, where were you the other day? Well, you thought you were going to come to the beach with us. No, I was at work, boss. And you're like, what are you doing, man? I mean, I gave you the day off. I paid you to take a day off, and you are working. You know, okay, fine. You know, be foolish. I paid you to take the day off, but you decided to be at work. I'm not going to pay you double. I'm not going to pay you anything extra for that. You already got paid. You know, you lost the reward. So, and that's really what we're talking about here. Is this that? God has given us His days off, and they're exciting, they're fun, they're easy, they're restful. That's what I mean, think about it. Everybody's always griping, I wish I had a day off. I wish I had a vacation. And God is saying, look, these are the days I want you to take off to rest because you need it. And what are we doing? We're complaining about it. It doesn't make any sense to me, John. So anyway, well, you know, I'm excited to have our guest here, Douglas Woodward. We're going to talk about his one of the two of his new books. The topics are Gog and Magog, and then we're going to also maybe discuss, if we have time, whether the Muslim Antichrist theory has any merit. Now, I'll be honest, I am considering that. I've not kind of made the whole thing, but I'm really thinking about it, and it does make some sense on certain levels. Doug is going to tell us why he thinks it doesn't make any sense, okay? Where he and I are very much in agreement is on the whole idea of the Gog and Magog war in his book, the next great war in the Middle East. He's going to talk about how he thinks that Psalm 83 is not a war. And I agree with him. I think Psalm 83 has been very much popularized by Bill Salus, who is a great brother. I just want to add that, okay? And he's a great brother, but personally, I think that his thesis is incorrect. And so we will be able to discuss that this evening. And I also want to say this, that, you know, as Christians, a lot of times we start to focus on the character of the person we're having a discussion with versus the actual topic as found in the Bible. And, you know, it so quickly deteriorates into, well, you're just a heretic, or, you know, you're this kind of person or that kind of person, or you don't love the Lord, you're not even saved, you know. And it's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate that we, you know, and I think all of us have a tendency to kind of go that direction, some maybe more than others. But, you know, it's something where we really need to be careful so that we stay talking about the topic. Because as you've heard, John, firsthand, with my intrepid co-host Rob Skiba on the Quest for Truth, there's some things we do not see eye to eye on. And the for one incursion or two is merely the tip of the iceberg. I'd say that iceberg has gotten bigger over time in some areas. In some areas, we've actually come more together on, and in some we've grown way far apart. But the point is that rather than start to call each other a heretic or say, well, he's not even saved, or whatever label you want to use that people have used throughout the centuries, we have to be careful because it's called slander. You know that it's just plain slander is what you call that. And as people begin to awake, remember this is called the awakening. I chose that name for a reason because I believe that God is waking us up. And I'll admit I was asleep on a few issues, and I'm sure I'm probably still asleep on some issues, okay? But I was asleep on certain issues a few years ago. For example, dispensationalism and such. And so, some people think that I'm going absolutely mad, but I don't think so, obviously, right? That's why I've made my choice. But the reason is because I keep reading the Bible, keep reading the Bible, keep reading the Bible. I'm always trying to take off those lenses that just don't work. And I believe that everything in Scripture has to fit together. And the trouble is, when you start reading the Bible, you start studying it, you don't have all the answers. All right, so let me just take a couple minutes here and explain my methodology for studying the Bible. All right, when I come to a passage, I ask questions of the text. Now, it's tempting to go straight to a commentary and say, well, what does so-and-so say about this? But if you do that, you will forever be a slave to the commentaries. And I'll tell you, sometimes the commentators don't know what they're talking about. Now, not all of them and not all the time. All right. But sometimes some of them have no clue what they're talking about on certain topics. All right. So again, I'm painting broadly, but I'm trying to say that sometimes some of them on certain topics have no clue what they're talking about. I think Calvin is maybe the exception to that. Okay. He from what I've read of Calvin, he doesn't really know what he's talking about most of the time. He's just kind of making it up. And unfortunately, when you had an illiterate society, you could do that because one person who was an expert on the Bible or a perceived expert on the Bible could kind of make stuff up. I'll just give you an example. When I was in college, I went to a private school in North Carolina called Warren Wilson College. And the amount of Christians there, I don't know, you could probably count them on two hands, maybe your toes as well, right? I mean, there were not many Christians there that I knew of, okay? It was a small school, granted, but there were a lot of just people of other walks, other ideas, okay? And to be a Christian was not exactly the most popular or the most, you know, the people, what people were doing. Okay, so I started to read the Bible. That's when I started reading the Bible, and it was not long at all until people thought that I was the expert on the Bible. And I'm like, wait a second, I've only just begun reading the Bible. And I look back and I'm like, oh my goodness, I knew practically nothing except that I had read it through once. That was my big claim to fame. I'd read the Bible through once. And and then people started to look to me as the guy that had the answers, which was really weird. So, but when you have a society that is well versed in the Bible, then you can't just start making stuff up. So the first thing you do when you come to the Bible is read it. Okay, that might seem like a no-brainer, but you got to read it, and you've got to read it. You got to read it a few times. And then when you have a question, you say, now, wait a second, what does this mean, for example? I'm just going to throw one out here that's a topic I've been dealing with lately. Did God make all foods clean or all animals clean? Did he reveal that to Peter? Did Jesus say that in Mark chapter 7? These are the accusations that people have about the Bible. Well, how would I find the answer to that? How would I possibly find the answer? Well, guess what? It's in the Bible. It may not be in the commentaries, but it is in the Bible. And what it tells us is that in Deuteronomy chapter 13, we see that if somebody comes along, has a dream, and he says to do something that God didn't say to do, then he's not a real prophet. All right, so that's your first test. That's what the Bereans were doing with Paul, right? If Paul had come along and said, hey, you know what, it's okay to eat pork now, they would have been like, let's go back to the Bible and see what it actually says about that. And they'd say, you know, Paul, it doesn't say that in the Bible. It doesn't say it in the Torah, it doesn't say it in the prophets, and it doesn't say it in the writings. So where did you get that? Well, I had this vision from God. They say, oh, we read about you. That's Deuteronomy 13. All right. Or if Peter had run into the Bereans and he said, hey guys, pork is on the menu, they'd be like, really? How do you know that? Well, I had this dream. You know, I was hungry and I had this dream and the sheet came down and now God said, kill and eat, and now I got to do it. They'd say, that's interesting, because it's not in the Torah, it's not in the prophets, and it's not in the writings. So you're telling us that pork is now on the menu. And he'd say, yeah. And they'd say, okay, pick up your stones, boys. Let's get rid of this guy, right? After, of course, they give him a due process, right? So you can't just make stuff up by having a dream. You have to, it has to be, first of all, predicted, or God has to say it, basically, to the prophets, because God does nothing unless he first reveals it to his servants, the prophets. Amos 2:9, all right, 2:7. Okay, so you have to start there. And if you don't have that, then you have nothing. So that's why we know that these later revelations, if you want to call them, will be nothing that is different than what God has already revealed. And that's why the New Testament is not something that's completely out of there. It's something that has already been established. It's already been told. We read about it, Jeremiah 31:31 through 33. It's right there. It tells us new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, right? So it's these kind of things. And I'll tell you, when you're studying the Bible, read it as literally as you possibly can. And it might even take you, just a little bit of effort to say, oh, I don't want to read this literally because it doesn't make any sense to me. But what you do is you say, I'm going to keep pressing in, I'm going to keep pressing on, and I'm going to take it literally. I may not understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me right now, but I'm going to read it literally as best I can. Now, that's not to say that there are not occasionally some metaphors and some other things, okay? There are, all right? So just kind of watch for those. When it says like, as, those are more than likely metaphors, okay? Sometimes you'll find a simile that something is as this, all right? Those are going to be in there, but generally you'll have the explanation that you need. In fact, really, most everything is self-revealed in the Bible. Now, the book of Revelation is great because it is a self-contained book with mysteries and also with revelations. In other words, you come to something where it says, Jesus is holding the 7 stars in his right hand. And then it says, here's the mystery of the 7 stars. It says the 7 stars are the 7 angels to the 7 churches. Voila. Okay, so now you've had this mystery. You're like, what are the 7 stars? Well, he says, well, here's what they are. The 7 stars are the 7 angels to the 7 churches. Okay, now, is this a principle that is true throughout the Bible? Well, as far as looking for the key that unlocks the mystery, yes. Okay, now, Rob and I got into this question the other day. Are angels always referred to as stars, or stars always referred to as angels throughout the Bible? In his opinion, it sounds like yes. In my opinion, definitely no. All right, because God says in a number of places that he made the stars. We read about that in places like Psalm 148. And just for the record, I'm certainly trying to be nice to my friend Rob. He's not here to defend himself, but since this is my show, I'm going to tell you what I think. All right, and you can ask him what he thinks later, and you can always save your question until Friday, and then you guys can gang up on me if you want to then. But it says in Psalm 148, it says, "Praise him, all his angels; praise him, all his armies." Praise him, sun and moon. Praise him, all you shining stars. Praise him, you heaven of heavens, and you waters above the heavens. So there you have it, right? We have evidence that he made the angels, and he made the sun and the moon and the stars and the heaven of heavens and the waters above the heavens. It says he himself gave the command that they be created. And It says he set them in place to last forever and ever. He gave the command and will not rescind it. Okay, so there's lots of other places I can go to. Now, you might be saying, well, Doug, I'm not a Bible scholar. How am I supposed to discover all these things? I'll tell you, the one tool that I'll, besides the Bible itself, well, I guess two tools. Sorry. One is the Word Bible software. I think it's wonderful software. It's awesome. It is what I use all the time. It's just absolutely great software. I'm going to just pull it up on my screen here to just show you what it looks like so that you can see it for yourself. Okay, so now you're looking here at the Word Bible software. And I have Psalm 148 pulled up. All right, now you'll notice here that I have the cross references. I'll tell you, these are the greatest thing in the world. These are your ultimate cheat sheet, all right? Because you don't have to know everything. And here's a little something, a little insider's secret here, is that when I'm teaching through the Bible, I have those cross references nice and handy, and I can just hover right over them, and I've got that right there. It makes me look really smart, okay? Because what it does is it automatically brings it up. I don't have to memorize all these different places. I just have them. Now, after a while, I start to just kind of remember where they are. But initially, it's going to tell me where these things are. All right, so look, we were looking at this question of, are angels always stars? Are stars always angels? Well, no. Again, I gave you a passage right here in Psalm 148 verse 3, but then it also tells me this in 1 Corinthians 15:41. There is one glory of the sun. Now look, the sun is a big ball of fire up in the sky. It's burning, it's bright, it's hot, and it's there. It's not an angel. It's just a heavenly thing. Kind of like the earth is a heavenly thing, like Mars and Jupiter and all the planets are heavenly things, and we can look through a telescope and see them. I've done it myself. I've looked through a telescope and I've seen the rings of Saturn. All right. So just as you have those, you have the sun. There's another glory of the moon, he tells us. And then he says, sorry here. There's one glory of the moon, another of the stars, for one star differs from another star in glory. Look, this is talking about the natural stuff. These are, non-sentient beings. These are not angels, right? So this is why we can know this. All right, so this is a great tool that I highly recommend that you use. And then the other tool, when it comes to so-called commentaries, the one commentary that I think you should use above everything else is called the Treasury of Scripture Knowledge. All right, and this has got 4 authors: Torrey, Reuben, Archer, Kane, and John. And I think I'm seeing my friend Doug pull up here, so I'm excited about that. But let me just share this with you before we go here. So we have the Treasury of Scripture Knowledge. All right, now this one doesn't have a lot, but it has enough. What it does is the Treasury of Scripture Knowledge is like a cross-reference resource, but on steroids, because it's going to list everything for you. All right, so it'll tell you again all the places where you can find these words. So it's even better than a cross reference. Look, here's another one, Psalm 8. I didn't think about this one, right? But now I see it. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have ordained. Hey, that's a pretty good one. How about Psalm 19? The heavens declare the glory of the Lord, right? Day into day utters speech, etc. And he says he set a tabernacle for the sun. Okay, we've got all this different stuff in here. And then we've got all these different places where I can go and I can see what it's saying. Now, not everyone is going to be that way, but it'll say something about the moon, something about the sun, and it's just a fantastic resource. All right, and so here we have another one. Look at this, Psalm 136, verses 7 through 9. To him who made great lights, for his mercy endures forever. The sun to rule by day, for his mercy endures forever. The moon and the stars to rule by night, for his mercy endures forever. This is it, you guys. See, this is such a wonderful resource because it's showing you, it's like the ultimate cheat sheet. You don't have to be, a Bible genius to be able to see into these things. This resource is right there. Now, the Word Bible software is something that you can download for free. You go to theword.net, theword.net. You can download that for free. Most of the resources, that is the books, commentaries, Bibles, most of them are free. All right. But there's some that the publisher just won't give away for free. So you have to pay for them if you want them. But most of them are free. I worked many years on helping to amass the library, but the real genius behind this whole thing is a guy named Costa Mesa. He's out of Greece. He's a computer software engineer, very intelligent, and he's great at what he does. Now, what I'm going to do at this point, because my friend Doug is here, our wonderful guest is here. He's just arriving. He's driving here into the Denver area. I need to take just a couple minutes, so I'm going to give this back to John. He's going to give us a few updates and such, and then we're going to get Doug situated, and we're going to jump right into the show. Okay, so just give us a second. All right, John?
Got you covered, Doug. Go ahead and greet your guests coming in, and be looking forward to talking with Doug here in just a few minutes. Want to bring you up to date on this week. Tomorrow night, we got a special guest coming on. It's going to be a special treat. We got Mario Martinez coming on at 9 Eastern, 8 Central. He's going to talk about a journey that he took to the lake of fire and returned, and he just wants to warn others. This will be a very shocking testimony. So tune in tomorrow night. This gentleman is going to tell you a story, or give you a testimony of what he endured and what he saw while he was in hell, and it changed his life drastically. It's my understanding that he was a hardcore gangster, and after he had this trauma experience, it changed his life, and he's a Bible-believing person, and he just wants to give that testimony out tomorrow at Eastern, 8 Central Time. That would be Mario Martinez on Now You See TV. If you guys are watching and you're viewing this right now, go ahead and hit the link and get to the chat room. That way, later on in the show, you can ask Doug and Doug. Instead of John and John tonight, it's Doug and Doug. Questions about what they're going to be talking about tonight. Doug Woodward, of course, WW3, World War III, the Looming Gog and Magog prophecy will be tonight's show. If you don't know who Doug Woodward is, he serves as an adjunct professor at a major university on the topic of entrepreneurship. However, that's not what he's well known for in the Christian arena. He's an author, speaker, and researcher in alternative history, apocalypse and culture, biblical eschatology, and the emphasis on America in biblical prophecy. He's written 10 books. One's The Final Babylon. One that you might know is Lying Wonder of the Red Planet. It's a really good read. Uncommon Sense, and Is Russia Destined to Nuke the U.S.? Who knows with Obama? The more he ticks off people, I think a lot of people want to nuke the U.S. In regards to that, Friday night we have Quest for Truth episode 3. So if you've not seen the episode 3, go ahead and watch it now, so that way you can gear your questions towards Rob and Doug, and hopefully we'll have another spirited and live debate this coming Friday. That's 9 East, or actually it's 11 Eastern, 10 Central Time. We hope that you guys have been enjoying the programs. Last night, John had David Carrico on. If you've not seen that, he talks about Freemason and the dangers and the looming dangers of familiar spirits in your life. Go back and watch that one. That was a heck of a show. We've got something coming up in July. We're going to be going to Minnesota. We're going to be hanging out with Chief Joseph and Dr. Laura Lynn. They're going to be having a conference up there in Minnesota. We're going to be hanging out with them and hopefully get a good documentary, interview Chief Joseph and Dr. Laura Lynn, interview the elders, and just hang out for a great conference up there for a few days. And hopefully soon, Babylon Busters will be coming out with David Carrico. He's going to have guests like Chief Joseph. Doug here, he's a guest. Rob Skiba, Gary Wayne. It's going to be a great show. Look for upcoming shows like that. In the meantime, we want to thank you for watching Now You See TV. Please hit subscribe. We really want to present Torah-based information to you guys, Christian-based information to you guys, give you stuff that will edify your walk with Yahweh, and not only that, give you topics to dissect and discern. The things that we do present on Now You See TV, you may not agree with 100%, but at least it gives you something to test and discern. Beyond that, tonight should be a good show. Doug Woodward, Doug Hamp, they've debated in the past on the gap theory. If you've not seen that, go to Doug Hamp's website and check that out. They debated the gap theory. I'm not a gap theory guy, but at the same time, it was a great debate. On Now You See TV as well, you can see past episodes. John's been at this for 10 years. He's put out great information, great speakers, interviews. Just check out Now You See TV. And again, I'm just sitting here stalling until Doug and Doug get back. If you haven't seen The Quest for Truth last Friday, it was lively and inspirited. It was before and after. Was there a first incursion or second incursion? And then we got into our angel stars. And of course, Doug, got his plug in tonight without Rob being here. Cheers to you. Anyways, they did get into a little bit of the flat earth. Hopefully, on the first episode, I believe Doug, Hamp, and Rob. There's Doug. Welcome back.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so we're almost ready.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, we're just getting Doug set up, and with the security key for the Wi-Fi, and then we're going to be right on. So yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt there, John, but I appreciate that. Thanks everybody for hanging out. It'll be well worth the wait here. So yeah, basically, Doug is in town because they're having a conference for prophecy in the news. It's going to be in Colorado Springs. So if you are in the area, I suppose it's probably not too late to get some tickets. Probably get them at the door. It's going to be a great conference. I'm going to just go and attend and enjoy the conference. I'm looking forward to that, and should be really fun. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to check out the Gog and Magog war. So, again, as we were saying, a lot of people, especially Bill Salas, good brother in the Lord, he really believes that Psalm 83 is the next big war. And he's spent a lot of time talking about that. When in fact, in my opinion, and certainly Doug's, Doug Woodward, he's actually written a book on this, that is not the next big war. Now, I won't speak for Doug, but I'll just speak for myself. I do not believe that Psalm 83 is actually going. So let me just get the URL over here to Doug. So that's the one last thing I got to do here. So maybe you can stall for me, John.
No, the one thing I wanted people to go check out, and I know they can find it on Douglas Hamp YouTube, is you two debated a long time ago the gap theory. And the way you guys debated was such love and such respect for each other that there was no dog fights, there was no cat fights. It was biblically sound on both parts, both giving great examples from Scripture about your beliefs. And it was one of those debates that you have to watch all the way through. It was a great debate between the Doug and Doug. Usually, like I said, you see John and John, but tonight it's going to be Doug and Doug. Also, John's coming up with a show for Saturday night. Want to remind everybody, I think he's lining up guests as we speak, where he's wanting to do a show every Saturday night for families that are staying in, tour observant families that are staying in, stuff that's things that go bump in the night, interesting topics. So stay tuned. Again, we thank you for watching Now You See TV, The Awakening Report with Douglas Hamp. Quest for Truth is every Friday, like I said, and thanks for joining us. And until they get back, I guess I'll stall. That's what I do. And we see that we have a lot of people. There he is.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. So yeah, let's consider this. Okay, I'm going to go through the text in Psalm 83. All right. So again, I'm using that incredibly wonderful software that I've been telling you guys about, which is the Word Bible software. You can download that for free at theword.net. And so I'm going to just pull it up on my screen here. All right, let's cruise over to Psalm 83. All right, this is the question the text in question. All right, so it says, "See your enemies rage; those who hate you issue. They plot against your people, conspire against your cherished ones. They say, 'Let us go and erase them as a nation, so that The name of Israel is not remembered anymore. Indeed, they shrewdly planned together, forming an alliance against you. The tents of Edom, the Ishmaelites, Moab, the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, Philistia, and the inhabitants of Tyre. Even Assyria joined them to strengthen the descendants of Lot. Interlude of Selah, right? Deal with them as you do with Midian, Sisera, Jabin, and the Kishon Brook. Okay, so the question is this talking about a particular war, or is this something else? And joining me is Doug Woodward. Hey, Doug, thanks. I'm glad to have you here, man.
It's great to be with you here in person. Hey, John, how are you?
Pretty good. I'm going to be going into chat, so while you guys are hamming it out and chopping it up, I'm going to go into chat, and every once in a while I'll pop in with some questions from your fans and people that got questions for both of you. So have a great show, you guys, and I'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you, John.
Awesome. Yeah, just so everybody knows, Doug has actually joined me here at my house, so I'm really glad that he has been able to come. He's on his way to Colorado Springs, and he did me the great honor of actually stopping in, and here we are. So this is really cool. So Doug, kind of give us the rundown here on the Psalm 83. Like, what is it that, in your opinion, why is that not the coming war? Bill Sells has spent a lot of time telling us why that is the next big war, but you see things differently.
Right. Yeah. Well, of course, Bill is, he's been, I'd say, working, presenting, and talking about Psalm 83 for quite a number of years. It's become, I would say, part of sort of the standard scenario that most futurists that are premillennial, they tend to see the Psalm 83 as sort of, it's just, well, that's just matter of fact now. It's, that's what is the next war. And there's no question that there are some pretty good arguments for it. If one looks at the characteristics of kind of the argument for Psalm 83, and then one looks at Gog and Magog, one can see how the two seem to mesh together quite well. It looks like that there's a certain number of the sort of the immediate neighbors of Israel, what's called the inner circle, which really, in modern terms, it would certainly be Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. And of course, there are ancient names in Psalm 83, a psalm of Asaph, who was sort of the chief psalmist and music director, if you will, for King David. Literally wrote this song 3,000 years ago. And so there's it's called an imprecatory psalm, which means a song not really of lament, but a song of cursing. It's really, the psalmist is actually asking the God of the Hebrews to curse all of its enemies surrounding Israel, and so that's kind of the context. And those that have studied history, I don't claim to be a scholar. I am a teacher, writer, researcher, but certainly there are a number of scholars that would teach that Psalm 83 was already fulfilled in the time of David. And so it's not a psalm with a future fulfillment. My point of view is that there's an aspect of it that could be future. There is, I believe it's Arnold Fruchtenbaum, that does not believe Psalm 83 is really a future prophecy, except to say that Israel, until Messiah comes, will be surrounded by enemies. And it will be surrounded by enemies that seek to destroy it. All right, and so the argument for Psalm 83 kind of flips over, ironically, to Ezekiel 38, and specifically kind of verses 8 through 13, which talk about Gog from the land of Magog coming against Israel with all of this confederation, which appears to be led by Persia, by Iran, not by Turkey, which kind of gets us into the Islamic Antichrist discussion, which we may come back to a little bit later. But for right now, Ezekiel 38 talks about a confederation of nations that are not the inner circle. They're a different set of nations. It appears to be Turkey, Iran, nations south of Egypt, such as today's Sudan, Libya, which it's really Cush and Put in the ancient languages, if you will. And so it looks like that there are two wars. There's an inner circle, and then there is an outer sort of an outer circle. And it looks like that the way the argument for Psalm 83 is constructed is that Israel goes to war with its immediate neighbors. It inflicts a devastating impact upon a conquest, really, upon its surrounding neighbors, and then it becomes a nation that lives securely, which is talked about in Ezekiel 38. That it is, it's interpreted. Ezekiel 38 is interpreted as speaking about Israel throughout that chapter, and that Israel is living securely without bars, without gates, and that Gog comes against Israel to take a spoil. Whereas in Psalm 83, the motivation for this other group of nations is to blot out the name of Israel forever. So there seem to be some real good reasons why you can differentiate between a potential war in Psalm 83 versus the Gog and Magog war, which both the Jews traditionally, Orthodox Jews, as well as Messianic Jews today, see Gog and Magog as kind of one and the same as Armageddon. They don't really distinguish between Armageddon and Gog and Magog the way that Christian, let's say, evangelical premillennialists do. And so that's kind of another thing. And the book that Doug Hamp mentioned, The Next Great War in the Middle East, is the name of my book, and it really is because it's dealing with sort of, is the next war Psalm 83? Is it Gog and Magog? Is it Armageddon? And so there's different positions right now. And again, the sort of traditional scenario says it's Psalm 83. I believe, like Fruchtenbaum, like Tommy Ice, that Psalm 83 has a prophetic sort of foundation, but it's not predicting a specific war that is yet to occur. And Bill, of course, believes that many of the messianic assertions about the Messiah destroying the enemies of Israel, he sees many of those as really related to the Psalm 83 war, whereas, let's say, Joel Richardson, who believes that Gog and Magog and Armageddon are the same war, he sees those verses such as in Micah chapter 5 and other verses, Zechariah 12 and 13, 14, that whole section, as really happening at the end, at Armageddon, when the Messiah returns. So anyway, complicated sort of setup to that, but the long and short of it is no, I don't believe Psalm 83 is a future war. I believe the next war is Gog and Magog, and I believe that war could happen at any moment. It could happen at any time.
That's awesome. You know, Doug, the irony is, if you could mute your mic, since we're in the same room, the irony is that I'm actually coming up on this microphone. So do you want to do that there on Google Hangouts at the top there? Awesome. Okay, so fantastic. I tell you, this is fun to really have them here in studio. It's pretty cool. You know, I completely agree with you that you know, when I first read about Psalm 83, I thought Bill made a good argument for it, but I was not at all convinced by the text that he was bringing up. And you know, to come up with an entire war based on one imprecatory prayer, it just doesn't seem very wise to me. You know, the Bible says that matters established by 2 or 3 witnesses. So, you know, to come up with this and say that there's going to be this thing before the big thing, you know, and then supposedly the rapture could happen even sooner than that, you know, I just felt like, you know, this is almost, we're getting into this area where, you know, you keep pushing this date back so that, you know, the rapture is going to happen sooner. My opinion is that, you know, when we talk about Zechariah chapter 12, 13, 14, those are talking about the second coming of Jesus. When you look at Micah chapter 3 and 4, it's, you know, especially 4, it's talking about the second coming of Jesus. I'm sure you know, Doug. I did a whole book called the Millennium Chronicles, and I did 3 DVDs. One of them called The Second Coming of the Battle of Armageddon, and I really believe that the Battle of Armageddon is the big battle. That's when Jesus comes back, and that's when he deals with the Antichrist, as we read about in Revelation chapter 19, of course, lots of other places, Daniel chapter 7, Isaiah chapter 2, the list goes on, okay? So when you look at those and you see that it's the big finale to what's coming. Now, in relation to Gog and Magog, this is where I kind of waffle. I'll just be completely straight up with you. I kind of waffle on this issue because I look at Gog and Magog, Ezekiel 38, 39, and I'm like, oh yeah, clearly that's going to be Armageddon, right? But then I'm like, yeah, but then you have these other things, like, they're out burying the dead for 7 years, and that doesn't seem to fit really, at least with maybe some of my preconceived ideas. So do you see Gog and Magog as something that is still previous, or prior, should I say, to the tribulation, or do you see that as happening in or at the end of the tribulation?
Do I need to, now, is that working? Good. We have to figure out how to do the microphone since we're sitting across from each other here in the studio. Yes, I have written extensively on what I believe is the scenario that that there are actually many others that agree with this scenario. Grant Jeffrey, the late Grant Jeffrey, Chuck Missler, Tim LaHaye, a fellow named Douglas Berner, B-E-R-N-E-R, who I really recommend, who wrote a great book summarizing all the different views of the Gog and Magog war. And I think, that there's, there's really about, 5 or 6, Fruchtenbaum is another, that we all believe that the Gog-Magog war happens sometime before Daniel's 70th week. Probably happens 3.5 years before, because as you alluded to in Ezekiel 39, there's these strange passages about needing 7 months to bury the dead and 7 years to burn the weapons, and it just seems inconsistent to believe that those things would be going on during the millennium, and it seems unlikely that citizens from the city of Jerusalem, who are basically put to work to bury the dead, that they would be doing that right, let's say, at the midpoint of the 70th week, when it appears that they are fleeing to Mount Seir, to Petra in Edom, which is kind of, again, part of that sort of standard scenario. And it is, if that is in fact true, then Watts Scholar is going really all the way back to Increased Mather, the brother of Cotton Mather. They read these passages in Ezekiel and they say, this is clearly, I think it was Increased Mather, instead of calling it the tribulation, he called it the Great Conflagration. And he was writing about 350 years ago. So, he was reading the same Bible that we read. So he was conjecturing about these things as well. But nevertheless, there's this sense that there is a time sequence that's laid out, because the Ezekiel prophecies are so specific. You can almost visualize guys in hazmat suits. When you look at Ezekiel 39, talking about how when passerbys will go by a body, they won't touch the body, they will plant some type of a flag indicating that they need to be professionally buried. The wording in Ezekiel 39 is almost that specific. So it's pretty intriguing. So the answer is, I think Gog and Magog, and there's quite a few others that believe that it will happen some number of years before. And then to kind of flip over to the other part of your question, which really is the kind of the challenge that the pre-tribbers, and I count myself as a pre-tribber, but that pre-tribbers that buy into the Psalm 83 war scenario, they are looking at the statements in Ezekiel 38. They assume that Israel is the land of unwalled villages, and I actually think it's America, which is another issue. They assume that Israel is the land of unwalled villages, that it's dwelling securely in Betoch, and you know Hebrew, and I don't, Doug, but betach means safety, although it can mean curiously, carelessly, dwelling overconfidently, and it does mean that in about a half dozen passages in the Old Testament, although 30 other times it means dwelling safely in the context of the millennial kingdom. And so that itself is a really interesting study, which I do in the new book. All right, so there's this issue of, does Psalm 83 have to happen for Israel, quote unquote, to be dwelling safely? Well, if Israel is not the subject of verses 10 through 13 in Ezekiel 38, then Israel may not be dwelling safely, or the other alternative, which is really the alternative that Fruchtenbaum and Gary Stearman, for instance, look at, is they say, well, in this context of verse 10 and 11, betach means dwelling carelessly or overconfidently. And that's possible. It could mean that, because it does sometimes mean that, although it's not the usual way it means that. So it gets into a pretty intricate connection, but the important thing to say is that the Psalm 83 war concept is totally dependent upon a very specific understanding of Ezekiel 38, 10 through 13, that may be incorrect, and I argue is incorrect, because I link the verses in Ezekiel 38, 10 through 13 to Jeremiah 50 and 51 and the daughter of Babylon. And maybe we'll talk more about why it is that I have this crazy idea about those things.
Let me ask you really quick, because this is one of those assumptions that we often make as prophecy writers and teachers. We make this assumption that Gog and Magog has to be referring to some time within our lifetimes, and yet the only other place that we hear about Gog and Magog is specifically in Revelation chapter 20, right? And it says that Satan's going to be released from his prison after 1,000 years. He's going to go out and gather all the nations together. They're going to come over the broad plain of the earth, right? It says Gog and Magog, right? So that's the only other place where that is mentioned by name. And according to our own rules of biblical interpretation, we should have a second witness, okay? So, the second witness only comes to us, and the timing could not be any clearer as to when that happens, that it's after the 1,000 years are expired that he will come out. So, and I'm not saying that I'm there. Sometimes I think about that scenario. I kind of wonder, I'm like, am I just ignoring that? And to be honest, yes, I'm ignoring it sometimes, because I don't know how to make the puzzle piece fit. But could it be that we're just ignoring this gigantic neon sign that says it goes right here? Why do we think that it has to go at the beginning?
Well, it's a great question, and having just recently written a book on that and then been studying that. In fact, even today, I listened for 2 hours to a video that Chuck Missler had done on Gog and Magog about 10 years ago. And it was really intriguing to kind of listen to him. He actually came up with, in effect, a rationale for how you are to differentiate between the two mentions of Gog and Magog, because you're exactly right. Gog and Magog is mentioned in Ezekiel 38:39, and it's mentioned in Revelation 20. There are differences between the two. Certainly, one of the differences is that in Ezekiel 38, Gog and Magog come from the extreme north, whereas in Revelation 20, Gog and Magog come from the four corners of the earth. So that's one major distinction. Missler's proposal is that the Gog and Magog in Revelation 20, after a 1,000-year millennium, that Gog and Magog was such a major war when the Messiah, leading up to the time of the Messiah, that it's become an idiom for a great war, and that it will look like it's going to be a great war, but it will be basically the fire from heaven will come and consume the armies of Gog and Magog in Revelation 20, and it essentially looks like it's a very quick end to perhaps a long drawn-out prelude to that final battle. There's really quite a few other things. I would say that Michael Heiser, who I respect as a great scholar, true scholar, Chris White, who does a number of films and has written a number of books, they both argue that the Gog War, that it's one and the same. In other words, that it transpires at the end of the millennium, that the Ezekiel 38 and 39 descriptions, they refer to Revelation 20. But if you go down that path, there's some real curious problems you got. You get right back into the issue of burying the dead for 7 months, the 7 years of burning the fire, and supposedly this happens in Revelation 20 right at the very end of the millennium. And of course, Doug, you have a view of the New Jerusalem coming about really at the beginning of the millennium versus, let's say, the conventional sort of dispensational view that the New Jerusalem comes at the end of the millennium. So anyway, it's not a perfectly clean answer, and there's some reason for debate. I would say that if you look at all of the preponderance of scholars from Gesenius forward, that Kyle and Delitzsch and others and so forth, that everyone, with the exception of a very few number of people, Bullinger would be one, I mentioned Heiser, everybody else believes that the Gog-Magog war happens either at the midpoint or at the very beginning of Daniel's 70th week, or, as I've said, more author writers in the last few years, the last decade or so, have tended to see it happening several years before Daniel's 70th week. So that sort of says in fact, I have a chart in my book that lists about 35 scholars that would, in effect, say Gog-Magog happens at the beginning, at the middle, or prior to Daniel's 70th week, and there's only a handful that argue that it happens at the very end. So just that alone is kind of a persuasive argument, I think.
We know it's interesting if we kind of take the position there. Did you mute your mic? Okay, good. Sorry. If we take the idea that this happens at the end, because while I see it could fit at the end of the whole millennium, I think that's a possibility. We can't rule that out. Partly we have to admit we're making assumptions about what the end of the millennium is going to be like, right? And we say, well, it can't happen there because X, Y, and Z, but we don't even know what X, Y, and Z really are. So we're just making assumptions. Secondly, when it comes right down to it, you start looking at the language there in Ezekiel 39, and it talks about where he's going to say to the birds to come on down and have a picnic here. Tell the birds and the wild bees to come and gather together and participate in the sacrifice I'm going to make for you. I mean, that's the exact same language that you have in Revelation 19. And I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather together for the supper of the great God. They meet the flesh of kings, the flesh of captives, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses, and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, both small and great. So when you look at that, I mean, it's the exact same language, because Ezekiel 39 verse 18 says, you'll eat the flesh of mighty men and drink the blood of the world's princes, drinking the blood of these rams, lambs, goats, bulls, all of them fattened as if they're from Bashan, fit for slaughter. Eat until you're fat and satiated. You'll drink blood until you're drunk from the sacrifice I'm going to make for you. I mean, that sounds exactly the same. So that really gives you this idea that this is coming at the end of the tribulation. Let's call it Armageddon for lack of a better word. Okay, basically the same thing. And to be honest, this as I keep thinking about this, and again, I'm just going to say I have not come down. Definitively one or the other. I grew up my whole life thinking Ezekiel 38 or 39 is going to happen before the tribulation, but I just keep going back to the text and I say, no, wait a second, do we find a second witness for this? Because when you start looking at the book of Revelation, you don't find that John is getting all these brand new insights. Not at all. He is simply getting a vision of what has already been given. and it's a reiteration, in John's own style, as it's given to him, but it's the same stuff. There's nothing different. And I mean, the amount of times that John quotes from or has the same vision as Ezekiel is just dumbfounding. All right, so it would almost make sense that we would have a second witness or a third witness or a fourth witness that's saying the same thing. That, in my opinion, would make more sense. And just to be quite frank, I'm actually leaning in that direction. And you can grill me when I write my book, okay? But I think that's what makes it more fun, is when we actually we take a good hard look at these things and we really are challenged. So, how would you answer that when you have the exact same language in Ezekiel 39 that you have in Revelation 19, which is clearly after the tribulation?
Well, first off, I would acknowledge that is, in fact, a strong argument for the idea that that Gog and Magog and Armageddon are one and the same. Now, that is very much at the heart of the Islamic Antichrist theory, that they see Gog and Magog and Armageddon as the same war. So you certainly have the great feast that God serves up for the birds and the various animals, to drink their fill and eat their fill. So you see that, and in fact, in the debate I did with Joel Richardson, he took the time to quote a number of interesting folks that argue that. A guy named John Darby argues that they're the same. A guy named Charles Ryrie, who's a much more modern theologian from Dallas Seminary, argues that they seem to be the same. You get into people like Dwight Pentecost, and they talk about the Jerusalem campaign, and they talk about it sort of an extended period of time. Perhaps beginning at the middle of the tribulation and going through to the end. So there really are some variances of opinion. And another, I think, really intriguing connection is the great earthquake that's mentioned towards the end of Ezekiel 38, with the two great earthquakes, one in Revelation 6, and you'll have to help me on this other great earthquake. Is it in Revelation 18? Try
16.
to remember. 16.
Yeah, 16.
Yeah, 16. Yeah, and so you have these two earthquakes in Revelation. You have this one in Ezekiel 38, and so it raises some really interesting questions, because there are sort of overlays between these two descriptions, and yet then you kind of flip back around and you go, but isn't it interesting that in Ezekiel 38, and this is of course one of my challenges back to the Islamic Antichrist. Although Richardson didn't really buy my argument, but that's okay. But is that there's virtually nothing else that's mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39. There's no mark of the beast. There's no two witnesses. There's no 144,000 being sealed. All of that stuff. The Antichrist is not really mentioned. The false prophet's not mentioned. So you have all of these other things that either were hinted at in Daniel, Isaiah, or Ezekiel, or they are brought out by John, in a unique way. For instance, there's two beasts. There's the beast at the beginning of Revelation chapter 13, and then there's the second beast that has two horns. And so, that's not exactly disclosed anywhere, to my knowledge, in the Old Testament. So there are some innovations and some new things that John brings out. And of course, it's interesting to me that Daniel was a sealed book, but Revelation is not a sealed book. In fact, it's expressly not to be a sealed book. So there's just some really interesting parallels. And the Islamic Antichrist, which again holds these to be the same, I find problems with, because it's not just an idea that the Antichrist is Islamic or is a Muslim. It really is a complete redo, a complete reset of the whole futurist scenario that we could say was sort of made famous by Hal Lindsey and Grant Jeffrey and Chuck Missler and sort of Chuck Smith, somebody that you know something about. And you sort of have this kind of popular American-oriented scenario about how the end times would happen, and it doesn't really fit with the Islamic Antichrist theory, which really goes in a different direction. But getting back to this idea of the next war, my sense is that if you tie Ezekiel 38 to the prophecies about the destruction of the daughter of Babylon, then all of a sudden it opens up a different set of things that tend to correlate. You have these armies from the north that destroy the daughter of Babylon. You have Gog from the land of Magog from the extreme north that leads this confederation against Israel. But I also believe, for a variety of reasons that we might not have time to go into because it takes a while to set it all up, I think America, England, and Saudi Arabia are plugged into verse 13 of Ezekiel 38. And anyway, so I think that there's kind of a connection there that suggests that Gog and Magog is in fact a war that happens leading up to the unveiling or the revelation of the Antichrist. And it, kind of jump ahead, I'll make the statement, America is destroyed, Russia is destroyed, and it creates an opportunity within a few years for the Antichrist to arise, make the treaty of death and hell with Israel. Israel will appear to have settled into a time of peace and safety after all of that, but it yet will still make this covenant with the Antichrist. And of course, then the question is, well, if America's gone, and if all of these Islamic nations have been destroyed, and if Russia's destroyed, who's left? Well, guess what? We get back to the concept of the revived Roman Empire, and isn't it possible, isn't it interesting that somehow Germany has been left unscathed in all of this? So I kind of do some conjecturing and all that in the book.
You raise an interesting point about the revived Roman Empire, but let's think about that for a second, because we always assume that the revived Roman Empire has to do with Rome, right? But the Roman Empire was huge, right? And as Daniel correctly predicted, Nebuchadnezzar's dream predicted it, right? But you have in Daniel chapter 2, you have, of course, the head of gold. You then have the torso of silver. You've got the loins of bronze there, and then you have the feet and the toes of iron, right? Yeah, of iron and clay there. So you have these two legs. Okay, you got these two legs, and that's exactly what happened to the Roman Empire. It went from being a unified empire to now having two branches. You have the Byzantine Empire, and then you, of course, have the Roman. And you have also, even while Rome was united, it was huge. I mean, it encompassed everything around the Mediterranean. It went into, obviously, parts there of Africa. It went into the Middle East. It went all over. So, I think that it's a little bit myopic to suggest that the revived Roman Empire has to be all centered on Rome or Europe or something, when in fact you have the revived Roman, or the Roman Empire was just enormous, and it could easily include some kind of a Muslim state.
That's absolutely true. It's a viable argument, and it's certainly one that, again, the Islamic Antichrist, that is their argument. It's curious, though, because instead of a revived Roman Empire, they talk about a revived Ottoman Empire, and they believe that Turkey will lead a caliphate. And Walid Shuabat even goes to the point of believing that Recep Tayyip Erdogan is in fact the Antichrist, and that he will lead. He is Gog, because you have Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and so forth. You have these individuals that were sons of Japheth, and they were, of course, located in Anatolia, which is Turkey. But I try to point out, but everybody was located there, because that's where the ark stopped. That's where the ark settled. So for a while, after they all came out, they were all living in Turkey. So it becomes an interesting issue. But anyway, they dismiss, interestingly, the Roman Empire altogether in terms of Daniel 7. They don't see Rome as the empire. They see the Ottoman Empire. which is really a curious issue, a curious argument. But they see the two legs and the iron and the clay that don't really mix together. If I'm not mistaken, they see that as Sunni and Shia. But what's interesting, and I'll just jump in and make this point just because I want to take a swipe at the Islamic Antichrist theory, is that they talk in terms of the king of the north and the king of the south, referencing Daniel 11. And their argument depends heavily upon what's known as the two-king theory, that the king of the north exists and fights against the king of the south and then conquers the king of the south and pushes through and takes over other parts of Africa. Then tidings from the east and from the north cause him to come back into the beautiful land, which is an idiom for Israel. But in their theory, which was originally put together in about 2006, Joel Richardson basically took Walid Shuabat's ideas and the two of them together wrote a book called God's War on Terror. But in that book, they argue that the king of the north is Turkey, the king of the south is Egypt, and historically in the Bible that would be true, but it doesn't work so well in today's geopolitics, given what's happened sort of post-Arab Spring, and given that you have these really decided, real divergent, Sunni Shia ideas, and the concept that either Iran or Turkey could lead the other nations. It's really tough. There's just almost no precedent for these guys working hand in hand, if you will, against Israel, let alone the rest of the world. So anyway, so back to the issue of Rome, Roman Empire. Certainly Hal Lindsey argued that it was Rome, and partly because he felt the Lord had led him to see that before looking at a tourist sign and the seven hills of Rome. Curious, if you look at Wikipedia, your listeners might want to do this. If you look at Wikipedia and you look up, what cities are on seven mountains or seven hills, you're going to find almost 70 cities that claim to be cities that are on seven hills, including Moscow, Mecca, Jerusalem, Washington, D.C., Seattle, where I lived for a while, and so forth. So anyway, it's pretty interesting, but I don't think it has to be Rome. In fact, I end up believing that the Roman Empire really is a reference, ties into Tyre, ties into Tarshish, to America, to England, and so forth, which I'm going to stop right there because that's another show.
Wow. Man, this has been awesome. I'm so glad that we could have this show. We've got a bunch of questions in the chat room, and I thought we would take some of those. So, John, if you'll do us the honor there of listing some of those questions for us, and then we'll give the floor to Doug.
One of the questions and one of the topics of the evening is Gog and Magog and what's going on in the world today. And it's a hot topic with the shooting down in Orlando, the knifing over in France. They want to know what your all's take, both of yours take, is towards the Muslim Antichrist and what that means with the political era that we're in, with Trump, with Hillary. And the question is pretty extensive, but they're wanting to know what your view is on America leaning, its administration leaning with the Muslims, and yet you have the anti-Muslim group with Trump. And will this lead into confusion around the world where we're at now? Is that gonna lead us into an end time scenario?
Well, it's a great question, and just in the last very few days, I follow the interaction between Russia and the United States very closely. I wrote a small book about 9 months ago, and the title was "Is Russia Destined to Nuke the U.S.?" And so I watch very carefully what's going on. In the last few days, the U.S. has turned a aircraft carrier around and is moving a second aircraft carrier into the Mediterranean. This is following deployment of what we used to call ABM, anti-ballistic missile system, that's been deployed just in the last couple of 3 weeks in Romania. And this has absolutely set Putin on edge, and so there is a lot of saber rattling going on right now, and it's a long story, a long question, but it bears very careful watch. And we could get into some interesting conspiracy theories about whether there's even going to be another American election. Is this going to lead to some kind of a small war, martial law being declared? There are a lot of interesting things that are going on right now, but I would say it's a very pertinent question, and I believe, based upon my interpretation of the Scripture and the books I've written recently, that Russia and the United States are getting ready for a direct conflict, and that could happen literally at any time. Did you want to comment, Doug?
Sorry. I was just going to look up. This whole question. You kind of got me looking at something else there, but the whole question really reminds me of that quote that is attributed to. I don't know if Albert Pike actually wrote it, but it's attributed to Albert Pike about the 3 world wars. And whether he wrote it or not, it doesn't really matter in my opinion, because whoever wrote this thing, let's assume it was him maybe, but it has so much just profundity of where it's talking about how the Third World War is going to be this Hegelian dialectic, where you're going to set one nation up against, or one idea, one school of thought up against another. And when I saw what happened in Florida, I mean, to me, this is just the Hegelian dialectic happening perfectly. Now, if you're into Star Wars, into the prequels, I think a really easy way to understand it is that you have Darth Sidious is playing both sides of the fence here. Okay, if you're a Star Wars fan. Okay, so he sets up the Trade Federation against the Republic, and then eventually they both kill each other. And I think that's the same thing that's happening, is that we have, Satan, who is, Mr. Sidious himself. He is setting up both sides against themselves. You got these Muslims who, to some extent, I mean, look, I don't think the Muslims are that great. I really don't. But ironically, in some areas, some of their values are actually correct. In other words, this anti-homosexual value, that is a correct value. They blow it in lots of other areas, okay? But as far as their philosophy, whether homosexuality is right or wrong, well, they are correct that it is a wrong value. And so, I think that's where you have this, you have this one side of the dialectic, you have this thesis, antithesis, synthesis, okay? So you've got, on this side, this, I don't think ultra-conservative is the right word, but you have this Muslim group who stand up for a few things. They look over in the West and they see just debauchery at every level, okay? But of course, again, they have lots of issues, and I'll be the first to denounce Islam. But then you come over here to the West, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is ridiculous, okay? We have homosexuality. We have, of course, the exportation of pornography, up to your eyeballs, etc., right? And so then, but I happen to live in the West, right? What am I supposed to do? Because I don't like the Muslims. I think they're pretty lousy too, and I don't think cutting heads off every other day or every day, or 5 a day or whatever it is, and training your kids how to do it, I think that's disgusting and that is awful. So both parties are absolutely wrong. And you're setting these two up against each other so that they will destroy one another. And then out of the thesis antithesis, you then have the synthesis. And that's where I think the Antichrist is so clever. Obviously, Satan's his dad, right? So he's so clever, and Satan's plan is so clever, is that you have these two groups destroying each other so that out of the rubble will come this new thing. And I think that the Antichrist is going to be a person who's going to look great to everybody. He's going to smell sweet to everybody. He's going to be great for the Muslims. They're like, yeah, he's our dude. And for the liberals over here in the West, they'll be like, oh yeah, he's our guy. And I think that that's where it's all going to come together. So right now, I think that we are in the midst of the, how far along we are, I don't know, but we're in the throes of this Hegelian dialectic. And it's not going to simmer down until we reach that point of synthesis. And I think that will be the moment when we reach the revelation of the Antichrist. I think that's how it's going to come down.
Well, with what's been going on in the world the last few weeks, well, with the political system, here comes a question for Mr. Woodward. Do you believe that Yahweh has judged America, causing it to lead itself into a war with Russia? That's part of the judgment that's coming. Do you see that as part of the judgment? That's the question.
Yes. Yeah. Well, first off, I would say that Yahweh has been judging America for its movement towards dividing the land, and that has been going on really for the last 20 years. Certainly, the Oslo Accords, '94. There's so many examples. You've got John McTiernan, Bill Koenig, David Brennan. They've all written books talking about, as America has done to Israel. So you see this sort of, very direct response by acts of nature when America specifically tries to force Israel to divide the land. So America has been under judgment. Now, yes, the answer directly is yes. I believe if you study Jeremiah 50 and 51, certainly I could recommend, the book that I wrote with Doug Krieger and Dean McGriff, The Final Babylon. I could also recommend a book called The End of America by John Price that talk about all of the reasons why America fits the description of the daughter of Babylon in Jeremiah 50, 51, Isaiah 13. There's, about Psalm 137, Zechariah 2. There's I think it's like 223 verses in the Old Testament that talk about the daughter of Babylon. America fits these attributes. No one else has ever matched up to these attributes, and it is highly unlikely that Babylon on the Euphrates is going to be rebuilt and become a commercial, political, and military power. If the Lord tarries for another 100 years, maybe, but if the Lord comes back in the next decade or two, it's almost impossible to see how that could occur. So I believe America is going to be judged. I believe that is stated, it's implied in Ezekiel 38, 10 through 13, and I don't have time to explain that. You'll have to get the book, but I believe that's implied, and I think we're gonna see that occur, and then God judges Russia, even after He's used Russia to judge America, and that sets up, I believe, the time of Daniel's 70th week and the Antichrist.
One more question, John, is that right?
Yeah, we got one more. We got my messenger has been blowing up, so with a lot of questions. So I'm going to ask one more question, and it goes to both of you. Would you please ask? This is from JP. Please ask them about the giants of Gog and Magog and how they link with this whole thing.
The giants, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Our friend Rob Skiba certainly has talked about the giants of Gog and Magog, and they're sort of symbols or icons of the city of London. They have this Gog-Magog parade. I don't know if it's annual or just what, but that is something that Rob has pointed out, that he thinks that there is a connection between Gog and Magog. I believe it's the Irish or the Welsh, I think it's the Welsh, that believe that they are descendants of Magog. And so there is a connection of Gog and Magog to the British Isles. In the most recent book I've done, Mistaken Identity, the Case Against the Islamic Antichrist, I have a chart in the back that lists all of the historical references to Gog and Magog pre-Ezekiel, which is like Hesiod and Homer, and then Herodotus, which was almost a contemporary of Ezekiel. But there's all of these ancient references to Gog and Magog as the Scythians, which is basically, it's kind of a generic name for a whole slew of tribes, but they're almost always identified by the ancient Greek as the land of Rush, which, we could have an interesting discussion in Hebrew on whether, Rush is the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, or if it's the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal, which is a big debate in Ezekiel 38 and 39. But yeah, you know, that certainly is a very relevant issue.
I don't have much to add to that. I mean, that was fantastic. Thank you, Doug. I think that's an excellent answer to that question. You know, I guess I won't say anymore. Let's leave it at that. So this has been awesome, man. Thank you, Doug, for thanks for coming, man. This has really been fun. You guys, I want to encourage you to get Doug's book. I think you'll really enjoy that, and it's going to be something that going to really answer some questions. Doug, where can they get your books?
Yeah, I think my microphone is on. You can go to my author page on Amazon.com. I've got a dozen books now I've written. The last three pertain to the subjects that we've talked about. There's Is Russia Destined to Nuke the U.S., The Next Great War in the Middle East, and Mistaken Identity. So all three of those books are available on Amazon. They're available through Prophecy in the News that I'm associated with. They're available from many different distributors now. But certainly would, you know, you could also just do a search on Doug Woodward, or S as in Stephen, Douglas Woodward, and find those books. But certainly going to Amazon, typing in S Douglas Woodward, you'll find my books there. I've got both Kindle as well as paper, and I've also got on iBooks and Lulu. I've also got ebooks available if you're one of those kinds of guys, or the even more rare Nook user.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to thank you again. Everyone, thank you for joining us. You can always catch us at the Awakening Report on Facebook, and we will, of course, put this up there, and you guys can go back and check it out as well. So again, thank you to my guest for joining me. This has been a very exciting time of the Awakening Report. Thanks so much. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone over at Now You See TV. God bless you guys.
Doug, I have enjoyed your conversation. Thank you, guys, and everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, John.